Chapter 1. The Value of Wisdom. Solomon, the wise king of Israel, begins by telling us that wisdom is a gift from God. It is the greatest treasure one can seek, more valuable than gold, silver, or precious jewels. Wisdom is not something that can be bought with money. It is something that comes from God, and it gives us the ability to live a good life. Solomon speaks of wisdom as something we should desire above all else. Wisdom is not just knowing things, but understanding how to live in a way that pleases God. It is the knowledge of what is right and good, and it helps us make wise choices. The first thing Solomon says is that if we want wisdom, we must seek it from God. It is God who gives wisdom, and He gives it generously to those who ask for it with a humble heart. But wisdom is not just for the rich, the famous, or the powerful. It is for everyone who seeks it. Solomon calls on everyone to seek wisdom, whether they are kings or common people, because wisdom can make anyone's life better. Solomon goes on to tell us that wisdom is more precious than any material thing. It is better than silver, and its value far exceeds gold. Wisdom will protect us, help us make the right decisions, and guide us on the path of righteousness. Unlike money or treasure, wisdom does not fade away or lose its value. It is eternal, and its rewards last forever. Solomon also explains that wisdom is a treasure that cannot be stolen or lost. While money can be stolen and treasures can be lost, wisdom remains with us as long as we continue to seek it and live by it. Those who seek wisdom will find that it brings them peace and joy. Wisdom brings comfort to the heart, and it helps us to see things clearly. When we have wisdom, we can understand life better. We know how to handle problems, how to treat others with kindness, and how to honor God in all that we do. Wisdom is not just about knowledge. It is about living in a way that reflects God's love and goodness. Wisdom also teaches us how to live with others. Solomon explains that those who have wisdom will know how to build good relationships, be fair in their dealings, and treat everyone with respect. Wisdom helps us understand others and be patient with them. It helps us to see things from other people's perspectives and helps us live in harmony with one another. Solomon tells us that wisdom is the key to a long and fulfilling life. The one who seeks wisdom will be blessed, and they will live in peace. Wisdom will help us avoid the troubles that come from foolishness. It helps us to stay away from bad decisions and bad habits. Wisdom also teaches us to be humble, to learn from our mistakes, and to grow in understanding. Solomon also tells us that wisdom is more than just knowledge of the world. It is knowledge of God's ways. The wise person understands the ways of God and seeks to follow His commands. Solomon reminds us that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. To fear the Lord means to respect Him, to honor Him, and to recognize that He is the creator of all things. When we fear the Lord, we are starting on the path to wisdom. In fact, Solomon says that wisdom is the foundation of life. Without it, we're like people walking in the dark, not knowing which way to go. Wisdom helps us find our way, guiding us toward good choices and away from harmful paths. It is the light that shines in our hearts, showing us what is right and helping us to avoid what is wrong. The wise person is not only wise for themselves, but also brings wisdom to others. Solomon explains that wisdom is meant to be shared. When we have wisdom, we are in a position to help others. We can give good advice, offer encouragement, and teach others what we have learned. Wisdom spreads from one person to another, and through it, we can make the world a better place. Solomon reminds us that wisdom is not always easy to find, and sometimes it can be hard to understand. But he encourages us not to give up. If we seek wisdom with all our hearts, it will come to us. We should search for wisdom as we would search for hidden treasures. When we find it, we will realize just how valuable it is. It will help us make decisions, find peace, and live a life that is pleasing to God. Solomon also speaks about the importance of having wisdom in leadership. Leaders who have wisdom are able to guide their people with fairness and understanding. They can make good decisions for the benefit of everyone, not just for their own advantage. Wisdom helps leaders to serve others with integrity and to lead in a way that honors God. Solomon calls on rulers and leaders to seek wisdom because it is the key to just and righteous leadership. In the end, Solomon's message is clear. Wisdom is the most valuable thing we can seek in life. It is more precious than any treasure, and it is the key to living a good and fulfilling life. Wisdom leads us to understand God's will for our lives and helps us to live in harmony with others. It teaches us how to make wise choices, how to treat others with respect, and how to walk in God's ways. It is the light that guides us in the darkness and the strength that helps us face life's challenges. Solomon urges us to seek wisdom with all our hearts, for it is through wisdom that we find peace, joy, and fulfillment. Wisdom is not just for a select few. It is available to anyone who seeks it. It comes from God, and He is always ready to give it to those who ask. When we seek wisdom, we are seeking the very thing that will help us live the life God wants for us. Finally, Solomon tells us that wisdom is not just about knowledge. It is about living in a way that honors God and reflects His goodness. It is about following God's ways, seeking His will, and living in love and humility. When we embrace wisdom, we embrace a life that is full of purpose and meaning. We live in a way that pleases God, and we become a light to others, guiding them toward the same wisdom that has changed our own lives. In this first chapter, Solomon calls us to treasure wisdom above all else. It is a gift from God, and it is the key to living a life that is rich in meaning, filled with peace, and guided by God's truth. Seeking wisdom is the wisest decision we can ever make. It will guide us in all areas of life and help us fulfill God's purpose for us. Wisdom truly is the greatest treasure we can seek. Chapter 2. The Foolishness of Wickedness. In this chapter, Solomon warns us about the dangers of wickedness and how foolish it is to live without wisdom. He speaks of the choices that people make when they turn away from God and seek their own selfish desires. Solomon shows us that those who live in wickedness are blind to the truth, and they do not understand the consequences of their actions. They believe that they can get away with their evil deeds, but in the end, they will face judgment and destruction. The foolishness of wickedness begins with a hard heart. People who reject wisdom choose to ignore the truth. They believe that they can live without caring about what is right or wrong. They follow their own desires, thinking that they are in control, but they are not. They are like people walking in the dark, not knowing where they are going. When we refuse to seek wisdom, we are like them, lost in a world of foolishness. Solomon tells us that the wicked have no real understanding of life. They think they are wise, but they are only fooling themselves. The world may tell them that they are successful and powerful, but in God's eyes, they are foolish. They live as if there is no God to answer to, but God sees everything they do. Solomon shows us that the way of the wicked leads to destruction, and those who follow it will not find peace. The wicked often boast of their strength and their ability to do whatever they want. They believe that they can do evil without any punishment. They laugh at those who try to live righteously, thinking that they are smarter and stronger. They think that wisdom is for the weak and that their own cleverness will keep them safe. But Solomon warns that the wicked are only fooling themselves. Their strength and power will not save them when God brings justice. They will face the consequences of their actions, and it will not be good for them. One of the greatest foolishnesses of the wicked is their refusal to listen to wisdom. They mock the wise and turn away from the truth. They would rather follow their own ideas, even though they are wrong. They believe that they know better than everyone else, even God. They ignore the warnings of wisdom and go down paths that lead to pain and regret. Solomon teaches us that wisdom is the path to life, but the wicked reject it, choosing instead to live in foolishness. Solomon also tells us that the wicked are blind to the fact that their actions hurt others. They live selfishly, thinking only of themselves and their own desires. They do not care about the pain they cause to others. They deceive themselves into thinking that their actions do not matter. But Solomon tells us that every evil deed will be judged. The wicked will not escape the consequences of their choices. They may think they can get away with it, but God sees everything, and He will bring justice in the end. Another foolishness of the wicked is that they believe their pleasures will last forever. They chase after things like wealth, fame, and power, thinking that these things will make them happy. But Solomon warns us that these things are only temporary. They do not last, and they cannot bring true happiness. The wicked are like people who chase after the wind, always reaching for something they cannot hold. The things they think will bring them joy only leave them empty and unfulfilled. True happiness comes from living according to wisdom and following God's ways, not from selfish desires. Solomon also shows us that the wicked are blind to the truth about life after death. They believe that once they die, that's the end of everything. They live as if this life is all that matters, but they are wrong. The wicked do not understand that their actions have consequences in eternity. They may live for a short time in pleasure and sin, but after death, they will face judgment. Solomon teaches us that those who live wickedly will not find peace in the afterlife. They will face God's judgment, and it will not be good for them. The foolishness of wickedness is also seen in the way the wicked treat others. They are selfish and unkind, always looking out for their own interests. They take advantage of others, using them for their own gain. They have no concern for fairness or justice. Solomon shows us that the wicked may gain wealth or power by hurting others, but this will not last. In the end, their evil deeds will be exposed, and they will face the consequences. God is a God of justice, and He will not let the wicked get away with their evil actions. But Solomon does not just warn about the foolishness of the wicked. He also shows us the way to avoid their mistakes. He tells us that the way to live wisely is to seek the Lord and follow His commands. The righteous person, in contrast to the wicked, seeks wisdom and lives according to God's will. The righteous person is not deceived by the false promises of the world. They know that true peace and happiness come from living in God's truth. The righteous person understands that there is more to life than what we see in the here and now. They know that their choices have eternal consequences. Solomon also teaches us that wisdom will protect us from the foolishness of wickedness. When we seek wisdom, we are choosing to follow the path that leads to life. Wisdom helps us to avoid the traps of the wicked and to make good decisions. Wisdom keeps us from being deceived by the lies of the world and the temptations of sin. Solomon reminds us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. When we respect and honor God, we are on the path to true wisdom. Solomon tells us that the righteous will be rewarded for their faithfulness, but the wicked will face judgment. While the wicked may seem to prosper for a time, their success is only temporary. In the end, they will face the consequences of their actions. Solomon encourages us to stay on the path of wisdom and righteousness, knowing that our choices will lead to a better life. The rewards of wisdom are far greater than anything the wicked can gain. Wisdom brings peace, joy, and fulfillment, while wickedness brings destruction and regret. In the end, Solomon reminds us that the foolishness of wickedness will never last. The wicked may seem powerful and wise for a time, but their way leads to destruction. Those who reject wisdom and follow their own desires will eventually face the consequences. But those who seek wisdom and live according to God's ways will find true happiness, peace, and eternal life. Solomon urges us to choose wisdom and avoid the foolishness of wickedness, for wisdom is the path to a blessed and full. Chapter 3. The Reward of Righteousness. In this chapter, Solomon teaches us about the great rewards that come from living a righteous life. He shows us that when we live in a way that pleases God, we will be blessed, not only in this life but also in the life to come. The righteous are those who choose to live according to God's wisdom, making good decisions that honor Him. Solomon encourages us to seek righteousness, as it brings peace, joy, and blessings that the wicked can never experience. The reward of righteousness begins with the peace that comes from living right with God. When we choose to follow God's ways, we begin to experience a deep inner peace that the world cannot give. The righteous person does not have to worry about living in fear or shame because their conscience is clear. They can walk through life with confidence, knowing that they are living the way God wants them to. This peace is a reward that comes from being right with God and living according to His will. Solomon also teaches us that the righteous will experience joy. Joy is not the same as happiness, which comes and goes based on circumstances. Joy is a deep and lasting feeling that comes from knowing we are doing what is right and living in a way that pleases God. The righteous person finds joy in serving others and following God's commandments, and in knowing that their life has purpose and meaning. This joy is a reward that cannot be taken away, no matter what happens in life. One of the greatest rewards of living righteously is the wisdom that comes with it. When we choose to follow God's wisdom, we gain understanding and knowledge that helps us make good decisions in life. We are able to see the world through God's eyes and understand the truth about life. Wisdom teaches us how to avoid the mistakes of the wicked and helps us to walk in the path of righteousness. Solomon shows us that wisdom is not just for the wise or the powerful, but is available to everyone who seeks it. The righteous person finds wisdom in their relationship with God, and it guides them in every area of life. The righteous person also enjoys the reward of protection. Solomon tells us that God protects those who follow Him. When we live according to God's wisdom, He watches over us, keeping us safe from harm. The righteous do not have to fear the dangers of the world because they know that God is with them. This protection is not just physical, but also spiritual. God protects our hearts and minds, keeping us from falling into sin or being deceived by the lies of the enemy. The righteous can walk through life knowing that they are under God's protection, and that is a great reward. Solomon also shows us that the righteous will receive honor. While the wicked may boast in their power and success, it is the righteous who will receive true honor from God. People may not always recognize the righteousness of others, but God sees every good deed and every righteous choice. Solomon tells us that God rewards the righteous with honor and recognition. He lifts them up and blesses them for their faithfulness. The honor that comes from God is far greater than any praise the world can offer. The righteous can be confident that their good works do not go unnoticed by God, and He will reward them for their faithfulness. Another reward of righteousness is a long and prosperous life. Solomon teaches us that those who live righteously will enjoy the blessings of long life and good health. While the wicked may live for a time in pleasure, their way leads to destruction. But the righteous are promised that they will live well, enjoying the fruits of their labor and the blessings that come from God. Solomon shows us that living righteously leads to a better life, both in this world and in the world to come. Solomon also teaches that the righteous will be blessed with their children. One of the greatest rewards of living a righteous life is seeing your children grow up to follow God and live in wisdom. The righteous person has the joy of knowing that their example has been passed down to the next generation. Solomon tells us that the children of the righteous are blessed because they inherit wisdom and understanding from their parents. When we live righteously, we not only experience blessings in our own lives, but also pass those blessings on to our children. Righteousness also brings favor from God. Solomon tells us that when we live according to God's ways, we find favor in His eyes. God looks with favor upon those who live in a way that pleases Him. The righteous person receives God's help and guidance in all areas of life. Whether in times of trouble or in times of joy, the righteous can be sure that God is with them, giving them favor and blessings. God's favor brings success and prosperity, but most importantly, it brings peace and joy. The righteous are never alone because God's favor is with them. The reward of righteousness is not just in this life, but also in the life to come. Solomon reminds us that living according to God's wisdom leads to eternal rewards. While the wicked may enjoy temporary pleasures, the righteous have the hope of eternal life with God. Solomon teaches that the righteous person has a future filled with blessings and glory. Their life on earth is just a beginning, and they can look forward to an eternal reward that far exceeds anything this world can offer. Solomon also teaches that righteousness brings contentment. The righteous person does not need to chase after the things of this world. They are content with what they have, knowing that God provides for their needs. The reward of contentment is a great blessing, as it frees the righteous from the endless pursuit of wealth and material possessions. They can enjoy life without worrying about what they lack because they trust in God's provision. Contentment brings peace to the soul and is one of the many rewards of living righteously. In addition, Solomon shows us that righteousness leads to good relationships. The righteous person is a person of integrity, kindness, and honesty. These qualities lead to healthy relationships with others. When we live righteously, we treat others with respect and love, and this creates an atmosphere of peace and trust. The reward of good relationships is a great blessing, as it brings harmony to our families, friendships, and communities. Finally, Solomon reminds us that the reward of righteousness is everlasting. While the wicked may find temporary success, their way leads to destruction. But the righteous person will be rewarded by God, not just in this life, but forever. Solomon urges us to choose righteousness, as it brings lasting peace, joy, and blessings that cannot be taken away. The reward of righteousness is not only for today, but for all eternity. The righteous will experience God's goodness and faithfulness for the rest of their lives and beyond. In the end, Solomon makes it clear that the reward of righteousness is greater than anything the world can offer. The wicked may seem to prosper for a time, but their way leads to ruin. The righteous, however, will experience God's blessings, peace, joy, and honor. They will be protected, guided, and rewarded both in this life and in the life to come. Solomon encourages us to choose righteousness, for it is the path that leads to the greatest rewards that God has prepared for those who love Him and live according to His ways. Chapter 4. The Nature of Wisdom. In this chapter, Solomon begins to explain to us the true nature of wisdom. Wisdom is more than just knowing things or being smart. It is the ability to make good choices and live a life that pleases God. Solomon makes it clear that wisdom is not something that can be found in the world's riches, power, or fame, but in the fear of the Lord and living according to His ways. Solomon tells us that wisdom is the foundation of life. It is the key to understanding how the world works and how to live in it. Without wisdom, a person might make foolish choices, leading to pain and destruction. But with wisdom, we can navigate life in a way that brings peace and joy. Wisdom is what helps us make the right decisions, even when things are hard. It guides us and helps us avoid the traps that the world sets for us. Wisdom is also described as being something that comes from God. Solomon emphasizes that true wisdom is a gift from God, and it can only be found in a relationship with Him. The world may offer different kinds of knowledge, but none of it compares to the wisdom that comes from God. The wisdom of the world might give us clever ideas, but God's wisdom gives us understanding that leads to true life. Solomon encourages us to seek God's wisdom above all else, because it is the only wisdom that truly satisfies and leads to success in life. Solomon goes on to explain that wisdom is something that brings us closer to God. When we seek wisdom, we are seeking God's guidance. As we grow in wisdom, we begin to understand His ways and His purpose for our lives. Wisdom helps us know God better and helps us live in a way that honors Him. The more wisdom we have, the more we can see the beauty of God's creation and understand the good plans He has for us. One of the key characteristics of wisdom is that it teaches us how to live righteously. Wisdom doesn't just help us make good decisions. It also helps us live in a way that pleases God. When we have wisdom, we know what is right and what is wrong. It leads us to choose good over evil and righteousness over sin. Wisdom teaches us to be kind, honest, and humble. It teaches us to care for others and to serve God faithfully. Living by wisdom means that we are living according to God's standards, not the world's. Wisdom also teaches us the value of humility. When we are wise, we understand that we don't know everything, and we are open to learning from others and from God. The wise person is not proud or arrogant, but humble and willing to listen. Wisdom teaches us that the more we learn, the more we realize how much we still need to learn. Humility is a key part of wisdom because it keeps us teachable and open to God's guidance. Another important part of wisdom is understanding the difference between good and evil. The wise person knows what is right and what is wrong, and they are able to make decisions based on this understanding. Wisdom helps us see things clearly, so we can choose to follow God's will instead of the world's ways. It also helps us see the consequences of our actions. When we act without wisdom, we may not understand the harm we are causing, but wisdom shows us how our choices affect others and ourselves. Wisdom is also described as something that is precious. Solomon says that wisdom is worth more than gold and silver. It is more valuable than anything the world can offer. The riches of the world may give us temporary happiness, but wisdom gives us lasting peace and joy. Wisdom leads us to understand the true value of life and the things that really matter. It helps us prioritize what is important and let go of things that don't matter. Wisdom helps us live a life that is truly rich, not in material things, but in spiritual blessings. Solomon reminds us that wisdom is something that we must choose to seek. It doesn't just come to us automatically. We have to desire it and look for it, just as we would search for treasure. God gives wisdom generously to those who seek it, but we must ask for it and be willing to learn. Solomon encourages us to value wisdom more than anything else and to be willing to sacrifice for it. When we seek wisdom with all our heart, we will find it and be blessed by it. Wisdom is also a guide for our relationships. Solomon teaches us that wisdom helps us to treat others with love and respect. It teaches us how to forgive and how to be patient. It helps us build strong, healthy relationships with those around us. Wisdom helps us understand the needs of others and how we can help meet those needs. It teaches us to be kind, to listen, and to act in ways that show love and care. When we live with wisdom, our relationships are strengthened, and we experience the joy of loving and serving others. As we continue to seek wisdom, Solomon also tells us that wisdom will protect us. The more wisdom we gain, the better we can avoid the dangers of life. Wisdom helps us make choices that keep us safe from harm and keep us on the right path. It keeps us from falling into traps and from being led astray. When we live wisely, we avoid many of the troubles that come from foolishness. Wisdom is like a shield that protects us from the dangers of life and helps us stay on God's path. Another important point Solomon makes is that wisdom leads to life. The wise person is not just living a good life in the present, but they are also preparing for the future. Wisdom helps us live in a way that prepares us for eternity. It helps us make choices that have lasting value, not just for today, but for all time. The wise person knows that life is not just about the here and now, but about living in a way that honors God and leads to eternal rewards. Solomon also makes it clear that wisdom is not just for the rich or powerful. Wisdom is available to anyone who seeks it. It is not something that can be bought or earned through worldly success, but it is a gift from God. Anyone who desires wisdom and seeks it through prayer and study can find it. Solomon encourages everyone, no matter their status or position, to seek wisdom because it is available to all who ask. Finally, Solomon reminds us that wisdom leads to joy. When we live according to wisdom, we experience a deep, lasting joy that comes from knowing we are doing what is right. Wisdom helps us enjoy life to the fullest, not in the way the world enjoys life, but in a way that brings peace, contentment, and happiness. The joy that comes from wisdom is the joy of living in a way that pleases God and brings us closer to Him. In this chapter, Solomon paints a picture of wisdom that is more than just knowledge. It is a living, active force that guides, protects, and blesses those who seek it. Wisdom is something that comes from God, leads to righteousness, and gives us the ability to make the right choices in life. Solomon encourages us to seek wisdom above all else, for it is the key to a life that honors God and brings peace and joy. The wise person knows the true value of life and lives with. Chapter 5, Divine Justice and Judgment. In this chapter, Solomon continues to speak about wisdom, but now he focuses on the concept of divine justice and judgment. He makes it clear that God is just, and he will reward the righteous while punishing the wicked. Solomon wants us to understand that God sees everything, and he knows the truth about every person. No one can escape God's judgment, and no one can hide their wrongdoings from him. Solomon begins by describing how the righteous live with wisdom and understanding. They make good choices, and their lives are blessed by God. Wisdom helps them avoid the ways of the wicked, and they live in a way that pleases God. Their lives show the fruit of their wisdom, and they find joy and peace in following God's ways. The righteous trust in God, knowing that he sees all and that he will reward them for their faithfulness. On the other hand, the wicked are described as those who ignore God's wisdom. They live for themselves, choosing their own way instead of God's way. They may seem to prosper for a time, but Solomon reminds us that their end will not be good. God will not leave the wicked unpunished. They may think they can get away with their evil deeds, but God knows everything. Their hearts are filled with pride and arrogance, but in the end, they will be judged for their actions. Solomon teaches us that God's judgment is not like human judgment. People often judge based on what they can see on the outside, but God judges the heart. He knows the true intentions of every person. No one can fool God, and no one can escape his justice. When God judges, he does so with perfect fairness. He will punish the wicked for their evil deeds, but he will reward the righteous for their good deeds. God's justice is also described as being certain. Solomon says that the wicked will not go unpunished, and the righteous will not be overlooked. God's justice will come in due time. It may seem like the wicked are getting away with their wrongdoings, but Solomon assures us that God is watching, and he will make things right. The righteous may suffer for a time, but God will reward them for their faithfulness. In this chapter, Solomon also talks about the final judgment. He warns that there is a day coming when all people will stand before God and give an account of their lives. On that day, the righteous will be rewarded, and the wicked will face judgment. Solomon reminds us that this judgment will be based on our actions, and no one can escape it. God's judgment is not based on what people think of us, but on what he knows about our hearts. It is a reminder for us to live in a way that honors God, because he sees everything. Solomon also points out that God's judgment is not always immediate. Sometimes, the wicked seem to prosper, and the righteous may face hardship. But Solomon encourages us not to be discouraged by this. God's timing is perfect, and he will bring justice in his own time. The righteous may seem to suffer now, but in the end, they will be vindicated. The wicked may seem to be prospering, but they will not escape God's judgment. Solomon wants us to trust in God's justice, knowing that he will make all things right in the end. There is also a sense of hope in this chapter for those who are righteous. Solomon says that the righteous will have peace in their hearts, knowing that God will judge fairly. They do not need to worry about what the wicked are doing because they trust in God's justice. They know that even when things are hard, God will ultimately reward them for their faithfulness. This peace comes from knowing that God is in control and that his judgment is always fair and just. Solomon also teaches us that we should not take revenge on others. It may be tempting to try to pay back those who wrong us, but Solomon tells us that it is God's job to judge and punish the wicked. We are to trust that God will deal with those who do evil in his own way and in his own time. This is important because it shows that we trust in God's perfect justice. We do not have to fight our own battles because we know that God will bring justice. This idea of trusting in God's judgment helps us to live in peace. When we believe that God will bring justice, we do not have to worry about what others are doing. We do not need to hold on to anger or bitterness because we trust that God will take care of everything. This is a sign of true wisdom, trusting that God is in control and that he will do what is right. Solomon encourages us to keep our eyes on God's promises. The righteous will not be forgotten. They will be rewarded for their faithfulness. God will give them the strength to endure hardship, and he will reward them with his blessings. On the other hand, the wicked will face punishment for their evil deeds. Their sin will not go unnoticed by God. In the end, everyone will receive what they deserve. The righteous will receive God's blessing, and the wicked will receive God's judgment. Solomon also speaks about the power of wisdom in understanding God's justice. When we have wisdom, we can see that God's ways are always right, even when we do not understand them fully. Wisdom helps us trust in God's timing and his perfect plan. We may not always see why things happen the way they do, but wisdom helps us to trust that God's justice is always fair and will be carried out in his perfect time. The wise person does not panic when things seem unfair because they trust in God's judgment and know that justice will be done. God's justice is also a reminder for us to live with integrity. When we understand that God is just and that he will judge our actions, we are encouraged to live in a way that pleases him. Solomon wants us to understand that our lives have consequences. The choices we make today will affect our future, and God will judge those choices. Therefore, we should live with wisdom, following God's ways and trusting that he will reward us in the end. Solomon ends the chapter by reminding us that God's judgment is something we should take seriously. It is not something to be feared if we are living according to God's will, but it is something to be respected. The wise person knows that God's judgment is just and fair, and they live in a way that honors God, knowing that they will stand before him one day. Solomon encourages us to be wise, to live righteously, and to trust in God's justice. In this chapter, we see that God's justice is certain and fair. The righteous will be rewarded, and the wicked will face judgment. Wisdom teaches us to trust in God's timing and his judgment, knowing that he will do what is right. We do not need to take revenge or try to control the situation ourselves. Instead, we are called to trust in God and live in a way that honors him, knowing that he's Chapter 6, the call to seek wisdom. In this chapter, Solomon calls on us to seek wisdom. He speaks about the importance of finding wisdom and understanding, and how they are more valuable than anything else. Solomon begins by telling us that wisdom is something that everyone should desire. It is a treasure that will bring joy, peace, and blessings into our lives. Wisdom is not just something that is useful, it is something that can change our lives for the better. Solomon starts by saying that wisdom is something that is not easy to find. It's not like gold or silver that you can just go and buy. Wisdom must be sought after, and it requires effort. Solomon compares wisdom to a great treasure, something that is worth more than anything else. He tells us that we should not look for wisdom only when we are in trouble or need help. Instead, we should be looking for it all the time. Just like a person would search for treasure, we should search for wisdom. Wisdom can be found by those who truly desire it. Solomon says that if we seek wisdom with our whole heart, we will find it. We should not just look for wisdom when it is convenient or when we need an answer to a problem. Wisdom is something that we should want all the time. Solomon compares wisdom to a beautiful woman, a woman that is full of grace and understanding. She is someone we should desire to be with, to listen to, and to learn from. Wisdom is beautiful and will bring us great benefits if we are willing to pursue it. As Solomon speaks, he warns us that wisdom is not something that can be easily understood by everyone. Not everyone will recognize the value of wisdom. Some people are too focused on the things of the world, like wealth and power, to realize how important wisdom is. But for those who seek it, wisdom will be like a guiding light. It will show us the right path to take, and it will keep us safe from harm. Solomon tells us that wisdom will protect us and help us avoid the traps that the world sets for us. Solomon also speaks about how wisdom can help us live a righteous life. When we seek wisdom, we learn to make good choices. Wisdom helps us avoid making decisions that will lead us into trouble. It teaches us how to live in a way that pleases God and honors others. Solomon says that those who live with wisdom are able to stand firm, even when others try to lead them astray. Wisdom keeps us on the right path, and it gives us the strength to do what is right, even when it's hard. One of the key points Solomon makes is that wisdom comes from God. It is not something we can find on our own. God is the one who gives wisdom, and it is through him that we can understand the true value of wisdom. Solomon encourages us to pray and ask God for wisdom. When we ask, God will give us wisdom generously, and he will help us to understand the world around us. Wisdom is not something that we can just learn by ourselves. It is a gift from God, and we must be willing to accept it when it is offered. Solomon goes on to explain that wisdom is not just about knowing things. It is also about understanding the world and how it works. Wisdom helps us to see the deeper meaning behind things. It helps us understand why certain things happen and how we can respond in the best way. Wisdom helps us to understand the consequences of our actions and how they will affect us and others. It teaches us how to live in a way that brings peace and harmony to the world. Solomon also talks about the importance of listening to wisdom. It's not enough just to search for wisdom. We must also listen to it when it speaks to us. Wisdom speaks to us through the Bible, through godly people, and through our own hearts. When wisdom speaks, we must be willing to listen and follow its guidance. Solomon warns that if we ignore wisdom, we will face the consequences. Ignoring wisdom is like turning away from God, and it will lead us into trouble. But if we listen to wisdom, it will guide us in the right direction and keep us on the path to a good life. In this chapter, Solomon also speaks about how wisdom helps us to grow in our understanding of God. The more we seek wisdom, the more we will understand who God is and how he works. Wisdom helps us to see things from God's perspective, and it allows us to make decisions that honor him. Solomon tells us that wisdom will lead us closer to God, and it will help us live a life that is pleasing to him. Wisdom brings us into a closer relationship with God, and it helps us to live out his plan for our lives. Solomon also talks about how wisdom is something that helps us deal with the challenges of life. There will be times when we face difficult situations, and we won't know what to do. Wisdom helps us in these moments. It gives us the insight and understanding we need to make the right decisions. Wisdom teaches us how to handle challenges with patience, grace, and understanding. It reminds us that God is with us, and he will help us through whatever we face. Solomon encourages us to be persistent in our search for wisdom. Just like someone who searches for treasure, we should never give up looking for wisdom. We should keep seeking it, keep asking for it, and keep learning from it. Solomon tells us that if we search for wisdom with all our heart, we will find it. It is worth the effort, and it will change our lives in ways we cannot even imagine. Wisdom will bring us joy, peace, and blessings, and it will help us become the people that God created us to be. Throughout this chapter, Solomon emphasizes that wisdom is not just a good idea, but a necessity. It is something we cannot live without. Without wisdom, we are lost. But with wisdom, we are guided by God's truth and his understanding. Solomon tells us that wisdom will help us avoid the pitfalls of life, and it will help us make decisions that honor God. Wisdom is something that can protect us, lead us, and shape our lives for the better. In the end, Solomon's message is clear. Seek wisdom, for it is more valuable than gold and silver. It is worth more than anything this world can offer. Wisdom comes from God, and we must be willing to ask for it and listen to it. When we do, we will experience the blessings of wisdom in our lives. We will live with understanding, make good choices, and grow closer to God. And in doing so, we will find joy and peace that will last forever. Chapter 7. The Eternal Nature of Wisdom. In this chapter, Solomon teaches us about the eternal nature of wisdom. He begins by saying that wisdom is not something that just began or will one day end. It is forever. Wisdom has always been, and it will continue to be because it comes from God. Everything in the world is temporary, but wisdom is eternal. Solomon makes it clear that wisdom is something that should be valued above everything else. While wealth, power, and earthly things can be lost, wisdom remains forever. It is a treasure that cannot be taken away, and it is more precious than anything we can imagine. Solomon starts by describing wisdom as something that comes from God. It is a gift from the Creator, and it is through wisdom that we can truly understand the world around us. He says that when God created the world, wisdom was present with him. Before the earth was made, wisdom was there, helping God shape everything in its place. Wisdom was the guide that God used to create the heavens, the earth, and everything in them. Wisdom is therefore not just something that can be found in the world, but it is something that has been with God from the very beginning. It is part of God's plan for the world, and it is through wisdom that we are able to understand His creation. Solomon speaks about how wisdom is connected to the knowledge of God. The more we know about God, the more we understand the wisdom that comes from Him. Wisdom and knowledge go hand in hand. If we desire to be wise, we must also desire to know God. Wisdom helps us to understand God's ways and His plans. It helps us see the world from God's perspective. This knowledge is not just for the wise of the world, but it is for everyone who seeks it. Wisdom is available to all who ask for it, and who truly desire to understand the truths of God. Solomon also teaches that wisdom is a guide for us in our daily lives. It is not just a knowledge of the past, but it is something that helps us now. When we face difficulties, challenges, or confusion, it is wisdom that guides us through them. Wisdom helps us make decisions that lead to good outcomes. It shows us the right way to live, to treat others, and to honor God. While the world may offer many answers, wisdom leads us to the truth, showing us what is right and just. It helps us avoid the wrong path and keeps us on the road that leads to life. Wisdom is also a protector. Solomon explains that wisdom can shield us from harm. It gives us the strength to resist temptation, the courage to make right decisions, and the ability to see danger before it arrives. Wisdom teaches us to be careful and thoughtful, and it helps us avoid the traps that the enemy sets for us. Solomon says that those who choose wisdom will be kept safe, for wisdom watches over them. It is like a shield that guards us from harm, leading us away from destruction and towards safety. Solomon speaks about the value of wisdom in the way it helps us in our relationships. Wisdom teaches us how to live in harmony with others, how to be patient, kind, and forgiving. It helps us understand the feelings of those around us and how to act with compassion. In every relationship, whether with family, friends, or others, wisdom shows us how to love and care for one another. It teaches us that it is better to build others up than to tear them down. It also teaches us how to resolve conflicts peacefully and how to offer a hand of help to those in need. Wisdom brings peace into our lives and helps us live in peace with others. Solomon also talks about how wisdom brings joy and contentment. Those who seek wisdom and live according to its ways will experience peace in their hearts. Wisdom teaches us to be thankful for what we have and not to be focused on what we don't. It helps us to find joy in the simple things of life, and it helps us to find purpose in everything we do. Solomon encourages us to see the beauty in the world and in the life that God has given us. Wisdom teaches us that true happiness does not come from things or possessions, but from living a life that is right with God. The eternal nature of wisdom means that it never changes. While the world may change, wisdom remains the same. The wisdom that Solomon speaks of is the same wisdom that God gives to us today. It is unchanging and eternal. This wisdom is not limited by time or place. It is the same wisdom that guided the people in the past, and it will continue to guide people in the future. Solomon encourages us to remember that this wisdom is always available to us, no matter where we are or what time it is. We are never without guidance if we seek wisdom, for it is always there, ready to help. Solomon also warns us not to ignore wisdom. While wisdom is eternal and always available, it is not something we can take for granted. We must be willing to seek it and to listen to it. Those who ignore wisdom, who choose to go their own way, will face the consequences of their choices. Wisdom is like a treasure, but it is a treasure that must be sought. If we do not look for it, we may miss out on all the benefits it brings. Solomon tells us that we must choose to seek wisdom, to value it, and to make it a part of our lives. It is through wisdom that we find understanding, peace, and the true purpose for our lives. Finally, Solomon reminds us that wisdom is not just for a select few, but for everyone who is willing to listen. The wisdom that comes from God is available to all people, no matter who they are or where they come from. It is for those who choose to seek it, to ask for it, and to live according to it. God does not hide his wisdom from us, but he freely gives it to those who desire it. Solomon tells us that if we seek wisdom with all our hearts, we will find it. It is a gift from God, and it is there for all who want to receive it. As Solomon closes his message about the eternal nature of wisdom, he encourages us to live with wisdom. He says that wisdom will lead us to a life that is pleasing to God and full of joy and peace. Wisdom will help us make good choices, protect us from harm, and guide us through the challenges of life. It will help us to live in harmony with others and to find contentment in our lives. Wisdom is a treasure that is worth more than anything else, and it is a gift that we should seek with all our hearts. By living according to wisdom, we can experience the eternal blessings that come from knowing God and following his ways. Solomon teaches us that wisdom is eternal because it comes from God. It is unchanging, valuable, and lasting. Wisdom has always been, and it will always be, guiding us and helping us along the way. As we seek wisdom, we are walking in the path that God has set before us, and we are being shaped into the people he created us to be. Wisdom is more than knowledge. It is a way of life, and it is a gift that lasts forever. If you have enjoyed learning about the Bible and want to learn more about God's Word, check out our other videos here.